The 10th of October, 2018. You're watching Talking Point Live, coming to you live from the campus of Dixie State University and through the production services of the Community Education Channel. These people have been very busy here over the last 24 hours covering the opening of the senior games. They're going to go on today to do some city work as well. So thanks for accommodating us one more time here for the show. My name is Eric Young.
I'm Jennifer Kohler. And it is October 10th.
October 10th.
It's a significant day.
It is, on a number of levels.
Yes, personal and historical.
Yeah. Historically, how?
Well, okay.
So there's your segue into what it is we're going to be talking about today. This is what we do.
Great.
Trying to set each other up.
Sure. Okay. 50 years ago, on October 16th, so next week, probably be next Tuesday, October 16th, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, American athletes in the Summer Olympics, which I looked it up, and they were held in October in Mexico City. Not in the summer, but in the fall Olympics, right?
Which probably was better weather. I would imagine that was what drove it to be.
Yes. Yeah. So, and it was October 16th when they won, respectively, the gold medal and the bronze medal in the 200-meter dash. And then later that day, shortly thereafter on the podium, they will go down in history. And I think we have a picture we wanted to show of the two of them up there on the podium receiving their medals. They get up there and they're famous for the image of each of them wearing a black glove with their fists raised. And what is not remembered as much is the fact they were barefoot. They were barefoot, symbolizing the poverty that Black Americans deal with historically in our country.
I had no idea that it was that compounded of a message. Interesting.
And a black necklace or a black scarf referencing lynchings.
No kidding, really?
Yeah.
Can I see that again? Would you pop that back up there?
Yeah, one of them has a black scarf, one of them has a black necklace, remembering the lynchings of Black Americans.
Fascinating.
Yes, so from accounts, the crowd was momentarily stunned into silence, and then became semi-hysterical in booing and screaming out the national anthem to compensate for this messaging.
So you have these symbols put out there, the gloved black fist, the bare feet, the pseudo noose necklace kind of thing, but no explanation really given to those artifacts to the audience.
At the moment,
right?
Yes.
Right.
But in fact, they had organized an organization around Olympic athletes for equality.
Right.
So they were active. And I think they both went to San Diego State.
Right, but this was after the fact, after that.
Well, they were organized before the Olympics.
Okay.
And Avery Brundage, who was in charge of the Olympics for the U.S., or maybe all of the Olympics, was aware of their activism. So this was not a shock in that sense, that they were making these symbolic gestures.
But the audience response to that is
they were very
even
emotional.
in Mexico City.
Yes.
There, and not to assume that was the makeup of the audience. Obviously, it was very international.
Right.
There at that point, and the national anthem then was sung by the audience was the United States national anthem.
Right. Right. What else is interesting?
Now, this is sounding a little familiar.
Well, and this is 50 years ago, this coming week.
Right.
And then the following day, on the 17th, the Olympic Committee met, and Brundage wanted them evicted immediately from the Olympics just started on the 12th, so this happened on the day 5. Evicted immediately from the Olympic Village and wanted to have their medals, stripped of their medals. And it's gone down in history that, in fact, they were stripped of their medals when, in fact, they were not. And one of my students a couple of semesters ago did a report on this, and said that they each of them had the physical medal through the remainder of they still are alive, and one of them later on, for financial reasons, had to sell his. The other one still is in possession of his gold medal. And I thought, I went on the Olympic site this morning and was just doing a little research. Went on the Olympic site this morning, looked up the 1968, who holds the 200 meter, and there they are. So they did not lose their medals.
Okay.
Brundage attempted to strip them of their medals,
Right.
but was not
But
ultimately
wasn't successful with that.
So that's that's out there in the public as common knowledge. They lost their medals when in fact they did not.
So, okay, so there's a correction there.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting to bring up because it was a surprise to me.
So what does this mean to us now?
Well, it brings us back around to, I've been wanting to at least briefly talk about the take a knee movement within the NFL and so on, and now Nike getting in on sponsoring Colin Kaepernick and et cetera, this whole public discourse around it. And I was at a public event a few weeks ago, and a lady approached me and we were chatting, and I told her I wanted to discuss this a little bit on the show, and she said, well, she just said, I'll just tell you I'm not buying Nike products anymore. That tells you where I stand. She said, you just don't mess with my flag. She said, that's just, you know, that's just not even going to go there.
So let's break this down then. In terms of the symbolism that we've seen, you did that with the Olympians there with 3 specific artifacts. There with Colin Kaepernick, what's the evolution of? I know this question, but I'm putting it out here for the show.
Right.
What's the impetus there? What's the why take a knee? What was behind that? What did that mean?
Okay, well, so according to the people taking the knee that are manifesting the symbol, it has to do with a protest against undue violence against Black Americans by law enforcement.
But why that symbolic action of taking a knee? He could have just sat down, which I think he did the first time. He didn't rise from the national anthem, and then was counseled to instead to take a knee that is a form of perhaps maybe a military approach to some type of a protest that way. Do you know the story?
I don't know that story, but I do think it's ironic because typically taking a knee is when sometimes, you know, the tradition of a man proposing to a woman. Well, in the military, showing it's his honoring the
sign
person,
of,
right? Or a person being knighted by the king, they are down on a knee. So it's symbolically a symbol of respect,
right,
and obeisance.
Right.
So, okay, so what were you going to say about that, counsel?
Well, from what I understand as well, and I've tried to go through and vet this the best I could, and I'm still not convinced that I have all the information on that. So, or it's my skeptic coming out in me. But from what I understand, he was counseled by a veteran as well, and said, you know, if you really want to go through and still maintain the respect within this type of protest, kneel, take a knee.
Wow.
There,
because
you just sitting on the bench, this looks like you're uninterested.
You look like the guy at the popcorn stand, or walking in late to the game,
right? Who hasn't
forgot to take off
his hat, or
somebody who's just kind of clueless and
lackadaisical, or maybe apathetic.
Yeah, those people
whatever.
carrying on a conversation up there in row 40.
Right. Yeah. So he takes a knee, and suddenly we have a nation who is, and I use that term loosely, who is stunned at this, that somehow it is a disrespectful action, not just against the flag, but against those who have paid either the ultimate price of giving their lives for democracy and fighting for the United States, or those who are currently engaged in that fight on whatever level that fight might be.
So the message could be intended one way and interpreted a much different way.
That's what's fascinating about this, is the whole idea behind this was to protest what was going on in terms of violence against African Americans and people of color, especially having to do with the rash of police violence that's been documented and distributed through social media channels and then through traditional media as well after that's caught on fire. Certainly spurred on by the Ferguson, by New York City, by a number of highly concentrated urban areas that are experiencing, or at least, how do I say this? Just what looks like a dramatic increase in police violence against people of color.
Well, so you're saying there's grounds for being unhappy about the way they're being treated. okay, by law enforcement and violence.
I think
And
the evidence is pretty irrefutable.
I think so too, and it's been for a long time. So what's interesting also is John Carlos, it was Tommy Smith actually, expressed a regret related to his protest. And he said, it was the most courageous thing I've ever done. I felt like it was the right thing to do, but I regret that I did not take my family's safety and well-being into account adequately.
Not perhaps understanding the ripple effect of...
I did not protect my
Right.
family, and he
Yeah.
said his wife committed suicide
Oh, wow. Okay.
about 11 years later.
That is tragic.
It really is. I guess maybe 9 years later. And then I was thinking of the repercussions to him and his family. His boys were vilified in school, of course, death threats. And then I think of the Colin Kaepernick has a collusion lawsuit out against the NFL now, which is, I guess, getting resolved fairly soon.
Yeah, we don't know of any additional threats against him beyond
Right,
that,
right.
which I think is interesting because he
Right.
could certainly have capitalized
Right.
on that. And I can certainly imagine with the kind of extremist responses we've had to Dr. Christine Blasey Ford coming forward and others, and the threats against their lives, their livelihood,
I
their
think we have an
homes.
image of them as well, and I guess of Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh. And again, people who call us to account as a nation. I think this is really interesting because I'll just have to speak from my own feelings, but I want to be the best version of myself as possible. And in my religious tradition, this idea of accountability and repentance is an ongoing, daily, lifelong process. I don't understand why it would be any different for my nation to hold ourselves accountable as a nation, repent, reform, whatever you want to call it, progress,
Ameliorate,
okay,
get better.
as when necessary, right? I don't understand why it'd be any different for a nation than it is, because a nation is just made up of a whole bunch of us individuals. So if as a person our whole lives, demand for a certain quality of life, demand accountability and repentance and reformation, however you want to couch it, I think a nation is the same. And that's why...
Isn't there a righteous indignation, though, that's now been emboldened on certain levels for people to turn around and say...
It is. And I think it's misplaced. I think it's totally wrong-headed. I think when people call us to account, and it's usually by way of protesting. And my students, we've been talking about this a lot during the Kavanaugh hearings, the disruption in the peanut gallery, basically. And people saying it's unseemly, it's out of order, it's the same with taking the knee, the same with the black fist. If the order needs some reformation and some accountability, sometimes you have to be out of order in order to facilitate.
So you have to push the norm. You have to get beyond that envelope of what is acceptable behavior.
If you play inside the structure that the power, the rules, the power structure has established, those rules are there to keep order. And so just by definition of trying to change the order, sometimes you have to get outside of it. You have to be out of order.
So lots of attempts to do so there. We have Jeff Flake is cornered in an elevator, who's confronted by women who are very agitated, very escalated in terms of his deciding to switch his vote or deciding to vote to sustain Kavanaugh. Orrin Hatch was also subjected to the same kind of protest behavior, and when he dismissed them as, oh, grow up, the retort back to them was, you can't empathize. And I'm paraphrasing it. They were a little more angrier than that, and perhaps duly so, that you're dismissing my victimization by not even hearing us out. There is no, and this is the word we're looking for here, you have no empathy.
Okay, now empathy is a truly human ability. Animals, well, we've seen elephants and whales. I'm not really sure that humans are the only species.
Oh, my golden
right?
retrievers are science.
Okay, it's empathy.
Certain
Okay, but
evidence of
imagination
that.
and empathy is highly developed in humans.
I don't know about that.
Well, that's the
skeptic
crux
in
of
me
the
says
matter.
I think we've lost that highly developed concept.
Yeah.
That it's been replaced by being emboldened, that my own patriotism gives me a license to not empathize with you, but to wrap myself in the American flag and say, God bless America, damn you, for your protests and your disrespect.
Well, it's a very emotional subject, and what Sally Jenkins had an interview. She's a sports writer, and she was writing about this, and she was saying that we have a vision of America. We have an ideal of America. And there's always a gap in our personal lives.
I just heard a snare drum and a fife go off, right? As you got into that.
Exactly.
Right?
But in and of ourselves, too, we have an ideal of how we would live our lives. And we have this gap, right? This gap.
Integrity, telling the truth.
Fairness.
Fairness.
Equality before the law. These are our ideals.
Neighbors, helping each other.
So in our personal lives, again, the gap. So what do you do when you're confronted by the gap between your ideals and your behavior and your reality? What do you do? Well, you can either excuse yourself, which is what I see happening when we try to shut down the protest and we don't empathize with the protesters. I see that as self-justification, or not being willing to be accountable. Or as a person, you can say, I need to be accountable. I need to look at my behavior. I need to try to make amends. I need to go through this process. And I think as a nation, if we are going to be, and how can we be happy with this idea of just leaving behind all these fellow citizens in their grief and suffering, and just march on as if they have no right?
Well, it's pretty easy to do when the President of the United States openly mocks those individuals. And that goes through and emboldens that behavior. It goes through and cancels empathy.
Well, we went to the debate last night up in Cedar City
Right.
with some students, with Mitt Romney and Jenny Wilson. And it was almost a surreal event because it was so respectful.
In stark contrast.
Stark contrast to the rest of the political debate that we hear.
Well, especially the debate down here between
Stewart and Gorbani.
And Gorbani, yeah. Sorry, my memory is.
Well, and that divisiveness was really between the audience and Chris Stewart making some claims they found insufferable.
Right, about the pipeline.
Right.
Yeah.
But Romney, neither of the candidates last night in Cedar City, Romney nor Wilson, made any claims that were extremely provocative, really. And, Mitt Romney started the night out by saying, and he said this several times, either myself or Jenny Wilson will do a good job representing Utah in the fight, and we both would do a good job. And he mentioned that a few more times during the debate, which I found surprising and unusual, that one candidate would somewhat endorse another candidate, and he just made their distinction on their party philosophies, the size of government, et cetera, the role of the federal government particularly. He kept emphasizing the role of state government. She kept saying that the federal government has a role, right? And that was a big distinction. But back to this idea of this empathy then. So, and the divisiveness and the willingness to just walk all over people's suffering and grief in order to, in the case of the Kavanaugh hearings, there's the principle of a fair hearing. And of course, Kavanaugh kept saying, that's all I want is a fair hearing. But many people feel like it wasn't a fair process.
Yeah, and it might be important for us to differentiate here because there were two hearings, okay, one for his nomination and the other one to address the accusations by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. So we have two different contexts there. And when we're talking about his having a fair hearing, I would like to maybe keep that in the context of the first hearing. Where they're going through, we have both sides going through and asking Kavanaugh questions in terms of his temperament, in terms of his past voting records, those types of things. And you had those protesters who were popping off, I don't know what their plan was, but every 10, 5 minutes, whatever the case might be.
Right, disrupting the proceedings and highlighting their unhappiness.
At what point, because of this obviously agitated Republicans, and it also, at the same time, inspired the Democrats, who, I think it was Dick Durbin who said, who commented during one of the outbursts, this is democracy in action. I don't remember the comment from the Republican side, but it surely derided the process of protesting, that there's a place for this to happen. It's not here.
It's inside the little square that we've delegated to you outside in this little corral, and you are welcome to shout all you want, but you have to stay inside
Much
this
like
little
the Chicago Democratic National
and
Convention.
don't do anything we find obnoxious or upsetting.
Okay, so they're protesting out of the box.
Right, which I keep coming back around to.
Does that hit an audience, though? I mean, you design a message, you produce content with the audience in mind, right?
Well, who was the audience? They had a huge audience.
Well, obviously it was, but I might argue that you know, at the top of the hearing, perhaps, and maybe as it came back after break or something, you know, in that respect. But when it goes through and disrupts a process, especially one that has been constitutionally prescribed, when it disrupts a process, do lawmakers at that point have the justification or lack of empathy, as the case might be, to say, you know what, you've had your say, let us move on with the process. Let's do what needs to be done here.
Well, I'm just saying, what if we flipped it? And this was the Democrats hastening through, what, Merrick Garland?
Right, right.
Right?
Well,
in spite of Republican opposition and
so we're just supposing
election.
here because Merrick Garland never got a hearing.
Right.
Okay.
Let's just suppose they got to the hearing part and they were shoving it down the throats of the Republicans. I don't know. Do you think people like John McCain and other people would just sit there quietly on the sides,
well,
and
no,
that many Republican activists would refrain from registering their disapproval in the peanut gallery?
Some might argue that Republican activist is an oxymoron.
Oh, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of activism.
All right.
But
We
you
just
see
didn't
what
see
I'm
it.
saying? If you just flip it right over on its head.
I would like to flip it on its head, and in fact, I'm already doing that because my own position is free speech is free speech. Okay, and I'm kind of advocating for something that I'm really not supporting in this respect, as far as protesting or not protesting and being able to recognize your audience. What we need on either side, I don't care where you're coming from, is the ability to recognize the audience, how they're going to respond, what values will resonate with them with the message that you have to get out there in order to be more effective and not as confrontational.
Okay, so go back to the Kavanaugh, then you were trying to make a point about were they being effective in their...
I don't believe that they were being effective.
Okay, they weren't helping themselves out.
They were protesting for protest's sake, but what we didn't hear truly, within their slogans, within their chants and things that were almost immediately stifled, was what about Kavanaugh's voting record on this? Mm-hmm. What about his predisposition in terms of women's reproductive rights? What about
executive privilege?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't. Mm-hmm. That's not happening.
But you don't think, as a result of that moment in time during the protest, that these other issues were then highlighted? You don't think that they were the catalyst for a discussion?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
I'll grant you that.
So couldn't you say they were effective in the sense that they drew attention to the hearing process?
But what kind of attention is what I'm saying?
Well, I think a lot of people were riveted. I bet you there was more eyeballs on that judicial hearing than
anything, even Anita Baker and Clarence Thomas. Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
So I would argue back that they were effective in highlighting the process, being unhappy about the choice, and then drawing attention to the topic, and that it was then explored in probably more philosophical or more polarized in many other venues because of their
I would argue
disruption.
back, and then coming into the second hearing with Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford, that it was not, especially given the lackadaisical FBI investigation, which was wholly a farce more than anything.
Now, when you say lackadaisical, is that on the fault of the FBI or on the fault of
I don't know which parameters that the FBI were operating under, but I do know standard operating procedures for the FBI, and that they were not followed.
Okay. I think somebody mandated a week.
Yes, absolutely.
And so whoever that somebody was that said it has to be done in a week is the one that really created a farcical...
Oh, you're saying week W-E-E-K. I'm saying week W-E-A-K.
Okay. All right. I think a lot of people are unsatisfied, and frankly, I was
when the principal witnesses aren't even interviewed.
Right.
for this investigation. There is a breach. My point, though, that's not my point. That's not what I want to go to, is that regardless of all that, regardless of not just the accusations brought against Kavanaugh, but also the analysis and criticism of his own temperament, and the calling out of the blatant lies that he put out there, regardless of the protest, it never would have resulted in a non-confirming vote. Even in the theatrics that we witnessed over the weekend of Jeff Flake and his being pulled out of the circle of Republicans, and this kind of back and forth, well, I'll vote, but on the condition that the FBI.
Are you saying it's all sound and fury?
Yes, it's theater.
And it's all political theater?
And no matter what the protest might have been, it could have been the most stunning, most emotional, affective type of appeal that could have gone on within those chambers by a single citizen or a group of individuals in there, it would not have mattered.
Really? And so you're saying that Collins, who was really one of the swing votes there,
no question,
no matter what he would have been accused of, she was not going to not support the nomination?
Well, she came.
Find that kind of.
Well, her speech indicated, and again, this was, I think, in a way, a sin license for her to go through and say, to look at the process of innocence until proven guilty, where that really wasn't the point of the hearing to begin with.
That's framing it in the wrong way.
It is, absolutely. She completely framed it in a way that everybody went through. They've already embraced that notion anyway, that we're crucifying Kavanaugh here because no one's actually proven anything against him, and somehow that was the point of the hearing. That wasn't the point of the hearing. The point of the hearing was to bring into question character, was to bring into question what might drive this individual to make certain decisions that are indelible in terms of the people.
Really, it's his trustworthiness that is
Absolutely.
The crux. But you see, some people are not framing it that way. They're framing it as
That's
a hearing. Did he commit a certain crime on a certain day with a certain person? And if that cannot be proved, like it would be in a court of law, and he gets the burden of proof, if you're going to get put in jail, is much higher than if you're going to get a job, assigned a job as a Supreme Court justice. So depending on how you frame it, and of course you frame it depending on what side and what outcome you want, right? So depending on how you frame it, then you're going to get a different result, and you're going to either win or not win.
Well, I'm saying regardless of how it was framed, it fell on deaf ears.
Maybe so.
So some consideration needs to be made when you're painting that protest sign, that placard that you're putting up, or you're going to put that banner out in a parade, or you're going to put that bumper sticker on your car, or whatever the case is going to be. Who has the ability to take that message, the message of the black glove, of the scarf around your neck or your bare feet, and say, wow, I understand. I understand, Colin Kaepernick, why you're taking a knee. And as a result, I'm going to be more empathic to your cause than I might be in holding you against some kind of patriotic.
To me, patriotism, to me, it's patriotic to hold your country to accountable and want it to be the best version of itself.
It's
as close to its ideals as possible. Patriotism has become a fashionable item to wrap yourself up in hate. And here's the thing, that can't happen, because patriotism can merge into nationalism, and it can get a very specific and dangerous. It already is. Yeah, and we can't allow that to happen. We cannot allow that to happen. So we're going to be talking about another topic starting next week. We just have a few moments. Yes, so introduce what we're going to go into next week, and we want to spend some time. So on the cusp then of the election coming up, we're going to kind of drill down on the Russian meddling in the last election in 2016. There's been a pretty definitive article published by the New Yorker that we're going to maybe dissect and take apart, so we hope you will go through and join us. We have an image, and this is Kathleen Jamison. Dr. Kathleen Jamison,
who is the author of that, and we'll take that apart next week, so we hope you join us. I'll post the article actually up on our Facebook page at facebook.com/talkingpointlive. I'm Eric Young. Thanks for joining us.
Jennifer Kohler.
See you next week.